I like to subscribe to all that. You already know what time it is. Netflix time. This movie's called Collateral Beauty. An advertising executive wrestling with grief finds meaning by writing letters to unconventional recipients as caring colleagues plot a ruse. So it's an emotional drama that came out 2016, about an hour and a half long. Spoiler alert, let's just get it. So we start off with this guy named Wilt giving an introduction to a man by the name of Howard. He does great sales pitches for the company. And his colleagues Wilt, Claire, and Simon all approve. He was a happy man back then, making the agency money and all that. 3 years later, he's completely depressed about everything, making dominoes and whatnot. So apparently 2 years ago, his 6-year-old daughter had passed away. And he's been in an insanely depressed state since then. So throughout all this time, the company's been going down, and Howard's the only one that has this high-grossing contract with another company to save the agency. The problem is, Howard's not in the right mental capacity to make this thing go through. And bottom line, he just doesn't care about anything anymore, about life or nothing. The entire account is built on Howard's relationship with this company, and without it, the agency will pretty much crumble, leaving a lot of people there without jobs. Later on, Wilt talks to Claire, and he tells her about his divorce from his wife, how his daughter didn't want nothing to do with him. His wife found out he was cheating because she had a private investigator look at him, and he's going to use that private investigator to stalk Howard, to see what he's doing on his daily basis. They really don't want to do this, but they got to come up with something. Next, we get this scene where Howard's flashed back into when he was having fun with his daughter. He basically divorced from his wife, he lives alone, he barely eats like that. He's got all these hidden reality and Journey of Soul books, and he spends his time writing letters because he can't sleep. And he pretty much hasn't spoken to anybody since then. So one day as he's mailing off these letters, the private investigator Whit Howard is on the case. And she actually illegally got these letters out of the mailbox. And these letters are pretty sad. But these letters are not written to people, they're more so written to things. The letters are written to love, death, and time. So technically, they really weren't going to anybody. So Claire goes to Howard's apartment to drop off some food, but he don't want nothing to do with it. And the owner of the building comes out. He basically tells him he eats all the food that people drop off to him because he doesn't eat it. His rent's overdue and Claire's willing to pay his rent. Damn, Claire, I guess y'all be kicking like that, huh? Later on, we see Howard riding his bike in the middle of traffic like he's trying to commit suicide or some shit. Then we get a scene where Whit goes to see his daughter, Allison, and he thought he was going to spend Christmas with her. She's like, yeah, I don't fuck with you like that. You cheated on mom. Besides, me and mom going to the Bahamas anyway. So his daughter goes to a private school, and mom's messing with somebody that has a lot of money. Later on, he hops on the elevator with Howard, tries to get him to come to a baseball game or basketball game or something like that. Then he starts talking about the shares, and Howard's not responding to nothing he's saying. So he tries to get back to work. He sees all these girls lined up. It's like some casting call shit. And this lady rephrased one of his lines that he said in the book. He thought it actually sounded brilliant, so he told his peoples about it, but when he came back, she was leaving. He made it a point to follow her into Highgale Theater. We got 2 other people in there practicing their lines, and she was supposed to be late for whatever they were supposed to be doing. So he sees everybody and admires their work, and Whit was to bring her back for casting. They don't flat out reject him, and he says he'll be right back. Later on, we see him in his mom's house, and she's talking some stuff about trying to keep the wolves outside, and he tells her we got raccoons out there to keep the wolves away. See, the thing is, I think she has Alzheimer's, and he feels like she's living in an alternate reality. So instead of trying to correct her, he basically just goes along with it. Then he comes up with the idea for the crew. So he talks about not forcing reality on people and going into other people's realities. So they're thinking to themselves, what the hell does this have to do with Howard? So the actors that he's seen earlier, he wants to hire them and pretend they're the 3 people that Howard's been sending letters to. He wants them to be love, time, and death. And he's thinking hopefully that will boost Howard's morale up so he can have a clear head with the company, sign off, and save the agency. So they laid out a plan to the actors at first. At first they're reluctant, but then they said they'd do it for $20,000 each. So it seems like the theater is pretty much run down, and I guess they're going to use that money to get the theater prominent again. So they make the deal official. So Simon and Lydia are going over the scripts, and Simon starts coughing a lot. She's trying to figure out what's wrong, but he's not saying anything. Whit's talking to Claudia. They're going over the plan, but he's also kind of flirting with her too. Then we see Howard peering in the window of this therapy focus group of people that have lost their children too. But he never goes in, he just looks at him and just goes about his business. So next day, while he's at the dog park, sitting on a bench, Lydia comes over and plays her part. He thinks he's imagining this whole shit, and he thinks she's just basically just tripping. He does have brief conversations with her. Now notice the lady in the background, that's the private investigator with her son. And he gives a convincing act to make it seem like Howard's talking to himself. Hell of an acting job, sir. She goes back to tell Simon she thinks her performance was superb. Then we go back to the focus group, so this lady's telling us a story about her son. It's pretty depressing, honestly. And Howard actually shows up inside the group. Now here we have Madeline. She's not really the ringleader, but basically she's like the facilitator of this whole group. She asks him about losing a child, but when she asks him what the name of the child was, he's just not ready for it and he's about ready to walk out. So she follows him to his bike and starts having a conversation with him. He does talk to her for a little bit, but when she starts to ask pressing questions, he cuts her off and goes about his business. Especially when she asks about his child's name. Next day he goes back to work, he's just setting up dominoes. Then Simon and Lydia get to talking again, and he starts coughing immensely in the store again. Lydia's like, okay, what's really going on? What's up? So he says he has some type of cancer called mythothelia. I probably got it wrong, honestly. But he's been fighting it since he was 16. It came back as a remission at 25, and then it got even stronger over time. He's pretty much thinking to himself he could die any day now. He hasn't even told his wife or anybody else that it came back. Then Harold goes back to work again. He has a quote-unquote conversation with time. And when he talks to him, his acting style is very aggressive. Then when he turns around, Claire gets to talking to him. And because she wants them to think Howard that these people are entities, she does her best not to look at the boy, to make it seem like he's the only person that's seeing him. Later on, she approaches him about his aggressive style, but she still thought it was pretty good. Then while Howard is eating, he's visited by Love, but she comes off as very weepy in her acting style. She meets up with With later and she thinks that she fucked up, but he reassures her that she did fine. He's giving her motivation, but he's still kind of sucking up to her, because on the low, he really wants to date her. His tongue did slip though, because he did tell Claudia some things about the business and what they were doing, and she don't want to be a part of it. She's having second thoughts. He was basically going to tell them to keep their money, it ain't worth it. But Lydia's going to find a way to bring her back into the fold. Meanwhile, Howard comes back to Madeline for another meeting, but it's basically a one-on-one meeting since everybody left already. They start to talking again. She talks about how her husband left because of the whole ordeal, and he sends her a letter saying, "I wish we could just go back to being strangers." But they're pretty much in the same boat as being divorcees. So they go back to his office and she sees how the dominoes are all stacked up, and he talked to her about Def not making a trade, basically saying he wanted to give his life up for his daughter, and of course it didn't happen like that. So she talked about how her daughter died. It was some type of brain cancer, but we don't really know how his daughter died. Next we get one-on-one with Simon and Lydia's telling Simon eventually, like, you're gonna have to tell your wife about this. He's like, at least give it a chance to say goodbye, you know what I mean? Meanwhile, Howard is still talking to Madeline some more, and this lady talks to her in the hospital to say, don't think of it as death, think of it as collateral beauty. She had no idea what that meant at the time. I guess she just took it as whoever that lady she was talking to pretty much probably felt some pain too. Then she starts asking him personal questions again and asking about his daughter, and he just cannot say the name of his daughter. He thinks this is a huge mistake at this point. He gets her a cabin and leaves, because clearly he's not ready to deal with all this just yet. Then Will meets up with Claudia trying to convince her to come back to the team. Then he tells her about the situation with his daughter, how he messed up, how he cheated on his wife, how a private investigator had to find out, how his daughter Allison just hates him. He gave his heartfelt speech, and she's actually kind of sympathetic to him, and she says she'll do one more scene. Meanwhile, Howard gets a letter about the Omnicom deal, and he has the answer that he calls. They're waiting on him to respond, but he didn't care. He tossed that shit in the trash and went about his business. Then quote-unquote time pops up again, and he lashes out all his frustrations, which was recorded by the private investigator. Same thing happens when he meets Lydia, aka Death, on the train, and also when he meets Claudia, aka Love. Keep in mind, his outbursts have all been recorded on tape by the private investigator. But why is she recording all this? Well, anyway, it's time for the meeting. But he used the footage to give to the board so he can explain his actions. They digitally enhanced it to make it look like all the people that he was talking to, Love, Death, and Time, were actually not even there. So it made it seem like he was talking to nobody. Just going crazy. But why'd they do this? So he would seem unfit to handle the share profits and leave it to his friends to sign the deal. I mean, they felt guilty about it, but at the same time, they're trying to save the company. The thing is, Howard is not crazy. He knew they were actors the whole time, and he gets why they did what they had to do. So he signs off on the paperwork to save the agency, but then he asks them, did they bring the second form? And the guy's like, yeah. So he signs the second form, and Claire and everybody's like, well, what the heck was the second form for? The second piece of paper was the trust form that was signed into her daughter's name, basically stating that she's no longer with us. And it took all of his power for him to finally sign that. Then he's out riding his bike again, but where's he going? Next we see Simon back at home in the bathroom throwing up. His wife asks him, is he okay? She's like, nah. And she pretty much knew what it was already. They gonna get through this together. Claire's looking through the internet trying to see if she can adopt a kid, because apparently she can't have kids. Then we go back to another therapy session. Howard's actually sitting back in on this one, but he's not saying anything. Claudia pays my man's up the money. With goes back to see his daughter Allison. He says, look, I'm gonna do anything I can to spend time with you. I mean, they're not on the best of terms, but it's a start. Lydia gets her cheese from Simon, but they had one more deep conversation. Alright, y'all, here comes some revelation. Madeline gets a ring at the doorbell. It ends up being Howard. And it gets to a point in the conversation where she keeps talking about her daughter Olivia and how she died. And she keeps saying it over and over again. And she wants him to say his daughter's name. But this is the one thing he hasn't been able to do throughout the entire movie. Now she says he was watching the tape of her daughter before he came to the door. Then she plays the tape and holy shit, it's Howard and their daughter. That's right, his daughter is Olivia. She was the one with brain cancer. Madeline is his ex-wife. Then he finally breaks down and says her name and how she died and everything. He keeps saying it over and over again. So it made sense why she kept following him after he came in at one time for the group. But she says she's been watching them come by there every week, and then he finally can't decide to go in. But the crazy thing is, the only reason he even decided to go in at first was because he had that conversation with Lydia. And him and his daughter always used to play with dominoes, so that's the reason why he's always setting up dominoes at the office. Then we go back to the hospital, where Madeline was telling him the story about Collateral Beauty. Turns out the lady she was talking to back then was Lydia. There's no way this could be a coincidence, right? On the final scene, we see Howard and Madeline holding hands walking through the park. And right on the bridge, we see Claudia, Lydia, and JT, aka Love, Death, and Time. Howard turns around and sees him, but when Madeline looks back, there's nobody there. So my question is, were they really just spirits the whole time? So there was no editing to the video, they really were just spirits. So how was Wilt, Claire, and Simon talking to them? Were they also just seeing things too? Was that supposed to be the beauty in all this? Collateral Beauty on Netflix. Check it out, like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. Look, these are the easy best. Big, you got that slogan.